What's up everyone, welcome to Nodes and welcome to another video on our JavaScript stories, and today we will move on to understand the further concepts of JavaScript, right? And you can see that I'm already having my roadmap on the screen, and we have already covered this much of topics, and today we have changed our station, so it's our station number 2, right? And today we will be understanding about the global execution context, right? So before starting, I just want you guys to know that if you want to get best out of this series, so make sure that you are following the videos in sequence, otherwise it will be hard for you to grasp the concepts of what we are discussing, right? So with that said, let's get started and let's understand what this fancy keyword is, which is known as our global execution context, right? So this is, I would say, the fun part, because this is the point where we will be starting to write code, right? And because once you write code and go through all the concepts, so it really helps you to hardware those concepts in your brain, right? So here you can see in my VS Code side of things, I'm having our index.html, which is already linked with our index.js file, and inside that index.js file, I'm just having one single console.log, which is saying JavaScript loaded, right? So before starting the coding, I want you to have a concept of what that global execution context is, right? So let's come on to our diagram, and let's go with something better, I would say. So let's go to our files, and let's create one new file, right? So if I can create over here maybe something, yeah, this is right over here. So new file, let's create this, and we are already concerned with the canvas, so let's open the canvas. And now let's discuss about the global execution context, right? So let's assume that this is your call stack, right? So this is your call stack. Let me just write that down for you. So this is our call stack, right? This is our fancy call stack, right? And here you are also having one code block, right? And this code block is having multiple function calls, right? So let's say we are having one function of test, okay? And let's say this test function is calling another function, maybe like test2, okay? And this is somewhat like this, and moving on, let's say this function is being called right over here, okay? So test2, right? And let's say at the end we are calling our maybe the test function over here, okay? So what we are doing is we are calling this test function. This test function gets pushed onto the call stack, right? And then after that this test2 is pushed onto the call stack, right? And the control comes over here, and let's say we are having console.log called over here, okay? So that's just for an example, right? So now let's see that how JavaScript will execute this code, right? So the very first thing JavaScript will do is we'll come over here and we'll see that this is the function call of test, right? That's what JavaScript is doing. So it will come over here and push the test function onto this call stack, right? So let's create one more rectangle, and let's say this is our test function call, right? And this will be pushed onto the call stack, right? Something like this, okay? That's what JavaScript is doing, okay? And once we go into the test, we know that inside test we are calling another function, which is test2, right? So that obviously also needed to be pushed onto the call stack, right? And that in that case, let's just duplicate this thing, and let's come over here and let's call this as test2, okay? So this is how JavaScript keep track of code execution, right? So this is how the concept works, right? So once the test2 function executes everything, it logs that onto the console. So that's something which is being logged onto the console. Once it's logged, then the test2 is obviously popped off from the stack, and then the control is transferred to this test function, and there is nothing inside test, so this test function is also popped off from the stack, right? So the call stack gets empty, right? So this is how JavaScript executes code, right? But do you guys remember from the last video that when we were executing code, so before even a single line of execution, there is one thing which was already being pushed by JavaScript engine to this call stack, and I told you that that thing was known as global execution context, right? So keep that in mind, that before executing a single line of code, JavaScript engine just pushes one extra function onto the call stack, and that is known as global execution context, right? So let me just copy this thing and let's paste it over here, and this is what I'm saying. So the very first thing which is pushed is known as GCE, okay, and that is known as global execution context, right? This is the very first thing which is pushed onto the call stack, right? And this is the object, this is the point where JavaScript provides you with those functions or those global objects, right? The window object, remember, when you're working on the front end side. So those objects are provided with the help of this global execution context, right? So we will see that how this works, right? So now let's change the flow, something like this. Okay, so the very first thing is that whenever your script start executing, so before execution of a single line of code, JavaScript comes and pushes this global execution context into the call stack. Then it will start executing your code, right? So it is test right over here, so it will push test onto this. Okay, and then inside test we are having a call to test2, so the test2 will be pushed, and once the test2 is finished executing, you will get this output on the console. Then test2 is popped off, and then this test is popped off, and finally when everything has been executed, finally the JavaScript engine will pop this global execution out of the call stack, right? Something like this. Okay, so this is how the flows work, right? So let's see that in action. So let's come on to our VS Code side of things, and let's see that how this is working. Okay, so here you can see that I'm having my console index.js file, which is being linked with our just HTML file right over here, and inside this console I'm only having this one script which is saying that JavaScript loaded, right? So let's open this with our live server. So let's open this with our live server. So once you open this thing, let's open our console. Okay, and this is our console, and let's make it side by side for better visibility. So inside this console you can see that we are having that console right over here which is saying JavaScript loaded. Okay, and just ignore this file because it's just because of that live server thing. Okay, so now if you come into sources, and inside this you can see we are already in our index.js file, right? And right, let's say if I push a debugger right over here, I add a breakpoint right over here, and I just refresh this thing. So now you can see that the execution is paused on this breakpoint right over here. Okay, and if you come over here, let me just make it a little bigger, and let me just click on this call stack. You can see that there is something already pushed onto the call stack, and that is known as anonymous, and we call this anonymous as global execution context, right? So you can see that the breakpoint has stopped at this point, right? And there is not a single line which is executed. Okay, and since there is not a single line which is being executed, but still we are getting this global execution context, right, which is this anonymous thing, and this is which provide us with all those document and all those fancy functions, right? So if you come onto our maybe scope thing, you will see that we are having one scope of this global, and inside that global we are having all the functions which we normally use while working with JavaScript on the front end side. And you can see that come over here, and you can see that we are also having that document object right over here. Okay, for which we use to manipulate the DOM and all the DOM operations. So this is which comes by default with that global execution context, right? So just to summarize, the very first thing, let me just make it bigger once again. Okay, so very first thing which JavaScript do before executing your code is that it pushes the global execution context on the call stack, something like this. Okay, so the very first thing it will do is, let me just come over here, it will pushes this global execution context, onto the call stack, and this global execution context will be having two different phases. Okay, we normally call them as the creation phase and the execution phase, right? So let me just split this down with a line. So this is somewhat a line. Okay, and the very first thing it will do is it will go with the creation phase, right? So let's bring a text over here. This is called the creation phase. Okay, and let's copy this thing and let's paste it over here, and this is what is known as the execution phase. Okay, so there are two phases involved in while pushing that global execution context onto the call stack, right? And in the creation phase, we already know that JavaScript or this global execution context will provide you with two different things. Number one will be the window object, and the second one will be this keyword, the fancy JavaScript keyword, right? So let me write that down here. So number one is this keyword which is provided by the creation phase, and the second one is our fancy window object. Okay, so let me write that down. Okay, Okay, so these are the two keywords which are provided by this creation phase of global execution context, right? And you can see that. Okay, so let's see that in action. Okay, so let's come over here and let's open the console again, and let's stop the debugger if I can. So let's go to sources, and yeah, let's move one step forward. Now the debugger has stopped, and let's go to our VS Code side of things, and let's log some of the logs here. Okay, so very first thing I want to log is our this keyword. Okay, and then I want to log our window object, right? So that's our window object, and then I need to check that whether these two are equal or not. Okay, so I will say console.log this equals to window. Okay, so let's save this thing, and now you can see that our debugger has stopped at that point, right? So let's make it side by side. So now you can see we are having this log over here. So let me just move to one step forward, and let's see that what we are getting on the console. Okay, so right now you can see that we are getting the same objects against this as well, and against as well as that window object, right? And these two objects you can see are always true. That means that the both objects are same, right? So the very first thing that global execution context does is it provides you with that this keyword which is already pointing to that window object, right? So this is what under the hood JavaScript global execution context does, right? And keep that in mind. There's one extra thing I want you guys to know is that if you write anything over here, that will automatically be attached to the global object which comes by global execution context, right? So let's say if I'm saying variable a equals to, let's say, test, and save this thing. So this a thing will automatically be attached to our global object, right? So now you can see that here at this point, line number 3, the execution has stopped, right? And it is saying that a is undefined, right? And that's just due to hosting, right? Because we have created the variable with the var keyword, right? And what hosting is, I have a complete section on that. We will discuss that in depth, but right now just assume that whenever the first execution start, it will mark every variable with undefined, right? And once you go through this line, this test will be attached to this. Pausing the execution on the next line, let me make it something like console.log, and let's say we are saying a. Okay, and let's come on to this, and let's pause the execution at this line as well. Okay, to see that whether this a thing is being attached to our global object or not. Okay, so let's go. So right now you can see that the a is undefined. Okay, and when I go to the second line, you can see that this point the a is being attached to our global object with the value of test which we have already assigned, right? So this is how we attach everything to the global object, right? So keep that in mind. Whatever you are writing at this point without any indentation, that is being attached to our global object. Okay, and same goes with the functions as well, right? So if you write a function, and let's say this function is also maybe test, or maybe let's say abc, something like that, and this function will also be attached to the global object, right? Keep that in mind. So if you come into this side of things, let's go to one step further, and let's refresh if I can. Okay, so let's refresh this thing. Okay, and now you can see we are having our function as well. So let's undo, and let's just keep a breakpoint right over here. Okay, and now you can see that the abc function is also being attached with our global object right over here at this point as well. Okay, and that is also due to hosting, right? What hosting is, we will discuss on that, but let's if I move this thing to one step forward, you can see that still this abc function is attached with our global object right over here. Okay, and you can also access it with this dot abc if you like. So if you come to our console, and let's say if I call this dot abc, you can see that it is giving me suggestions. So you will see that we are getting that function as well. And if you just call it like window dot abc, you can also do that. Okay, so it will be something like this. Okay, so we are still getting that function which is attached to global object, right? So yeah, I would say that's it for today, I guess, because this global execution context thing is the point where the fun thing starts in JavaScript, right? So keep that in mind, that global execution context is the very first thing which is pushed onto the call stack to just create an environment for you guys to start working with JavaScript, right? So remember the series from John Wick, right? So whenever John needs to go on a mission, so he need to stay in a hotel and has to prepare with all the guns and all the equipments for that mission, right? So just keep keep that in mind. So JavaScript is something like that. Okay, so this global execution context is just that preparation of John Wick for executing the mission, right? So this is the concept right over here. Okay, so yeah, I think that's it for now. If you're liking my content, so do like and subscribe the channel. I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.